and Japanese organizations have sent their younger people, go to the US, have a look around, come back, tell us what you saw. I've always wanted to bring something new to Japan. If you want to come to Japan, the easiest way for you is to get a job with a Japanese company. Lots of people are coming to Japan. They want to bring their families here. You can officially register a company in Japan as a foreigner, even with no visa title. However, there's a bottleneck.
Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and I'm sitting here today with Brittany. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Toby.
You're the founder of Design Thinking Japan. You're the host of your own podcast, Business Karaoke, and you've been here in Japan doing some pretty amazing things, hosting keynotes and running workshops, working with all kinds of partners. So we want to talk about your experience here, and maybe let's start with, how did you get here in the first place?
Yes, Toby, thank you so much for welcoming here on Unpacking Japan. It's a pleasure to be here. I really love to support the conversations that you're having, because I think one of the most important things that we see is the building of communities, and that comes through telling stories. So really great job to you and your team.
Thank you.
Everything that you're doing here. So when people often ask me how, I came to Japan, I often say that's maybe not the interesting part of the story. How I stayed in Japan perhaps is more of the interesting part of the story. So I came to Japan in 2005 was the very first time that I first came to Japan, and I studied in a place called Kagoshima. Now, it was really interesting because at that specific time, it was a really big deal because they had just got their first Starbucks. And I remember when I went to school, everyone said to me, "You're so lucky, we just got Starbucks this year." And I thought, okay, that sounds pretty interesting. And so that was in 2005. And then, more or less, I've kind of been in and out of Japan for quite a few times. I've studied in Osaka, here in Osaka, wonderful city, very close to my heart. I've had internships, but it wasn't until 2017 that something really interesting happened, which was that I was able to come back to Japan in the format that I currently am. So in 2017, I came to evangelize essentially and to roll out a global strategy of human-centered design for a global consulting company. And what always happens in Japan is we've been doing this thing abroad, it's been going really well, but somehow our Japanese office hasn't picked up on this new way of working. And so they usually need someone who can translate their global strategy locally. And so I was that person to help. And that was, 2017, 18, 19, and everything was going really well. And then in 2020, in-person trainings, maybe you remember, became less popular.
Yeah, I do. That was quite an interesting time indeed.
They became less popular, exactly. And so during that time, my husband and I went back to Mexico, funnily enough, of all places. And we kind of pivoted and built our business again from there. And then in just last year, in 2023, we came back to Japan in our current format, which is Design Thinking Japan, where we provide customized innovation workshops.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Tadaima. Arigatou gozaimasu.
It's funny that you said your first contact was Kagoshima, because we just were in Kagoshima not so long ago to meet one of our former guests on the show, Mitch. And we have a short video coming out, next week when I say this, but it's going to be out a few weeks prior to our conversation being released. But so you left during the Corona period, and you were in Mexico, doing a completely different business than what you were doing before leaving Japan.
No, Toby, we were actually doing a very similar business. What we ended up doing was just shifting our focus from the market. We did a lot of work simply just because of the time zone difference. So we were still serving the Japanese market, but because we're a global business in what we do with human-centered design, we just out of kind of location, geographical needs, I guess, we did a lot of work with the States. And I have to also say, another reason we did a lot of work with the States during the pandemic was because that market was more mature in terms of digital. I remember if you remember, like 2020, early pandemic, there were some Japanese computers, particularly for some larger Japanese organizations, that are not compatible with cameras, that are not compatible with microphones. And
still today.
Yeah, still today. So still today. And so the person, the user, when human-centered design, we were talking about the user was someone who was not even able to participate in a remote workshop, right? And so just because of, I guess, the maturity of the digitalization, not only in the employees, but more of the company at large. And if we think about it, many Japanese don't have Wi-Fi in their homes. Sorry, many Japanese younger people don't have Wi-Fi in their homes. They just use their mobile phone or they tether or whatever.
Actually.
And so, how are you supposed to take a 6-hour remote training, if you don't have Wi-Fi in your home where you're using your camera and, you're using online technologies? I mean, it's quite heavy, right? And so we ended up doing quite a lot of work with the States. And then it wasn't until I was hoping that we would have seen a little bit more of a pickup in terms of the adoption of remote work or remote training than what we did in Japan, but unfortunately we didn't. We did what we did. I mean, you have to just admit that. And then it was when the country opened again, the end of 2022. I think that was around November. It was time that people sort of were open again to human-centered design and the kinds of innovation programs that we were offering.
So you were running a pretty successful business in Mexico, and you were having a lot of clients and you were having partners and everything was working well digitally. But you still decide to come back to Japan where everything was still far behind with computers that don't yet have adapters for cameras and microphone. Why?
It's a great question, Toby. So one thing, I don't have a real logical reason, but there is something inside me that I've always loved living here. But I've never kind of wanted to do the typical teach English or work for a very traditional Japanese company, despite the fact that lots of them are my clients. I've always wanted to bring something new to Japan. And that was where kind of human-centered design really was a great opportunity for me, because human-centered design is essentially, it's a process that someone can learn. So that's why it's really good, because it's scalable. It's a process for identifying problems and then solving them really efficiently, essentially. But a lot of it has really close to traditional Japanese management principles, things like Gemba, going to the factory floor, seeing how people work, the Toyota idea box, anyone can have an idea, the idea of working in a collaborative team, right? We know that since even the Meiji times, Japanese companies and Japanese organizations have sent their younger people just to go to the US. This was in the 1800s. Go to the US, have a look around, come back, tell us what you saw, right? So there was a lot of that. And I've always just really loved being in Japan, but what I recognized, I guess, wouldn't say pre-pandemic, a little bit before that, before I came back in my current context of teaching design thinking or leading design thinking or human-centered design innovation programs, was that I wasn't providing enough value as a foreigner, I guess. And what I mean by that is that I was working in a large organization, and yes, I spoke English, and yes, I spoke Japanese, but I wouldn't necessarily say that I was bringing anything new to the company or new to the country. And it was when I found human-centered design that I thought, this is perfect, because it's really close to traditional Japanese management principles. I don't need to sell it as, there's this new fancy thing from Silicon Valley. Everyone, let's be open to it. If anything, what I'm saying is, forget about how we've been operating in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. Let's go back to the 1800s. And look at, some of the businesses that were born from that time, whether it was Mitsubishi, whether it was, other, real legacy companies. They were born of that time. And there was a lot of human-centered design and the elements of human-centered design in how they were founded. And so I thought, this is perfect. We can bring it back without it kind of being this new thing. And so I've always wanted to live in Japan, but I knew that I didn't want to just kind of do the regular thing. And so when I found this thing, and this is often when I hear people say that they want to come to Japan or they want to start a business in Japan, one of the first things I really encourage people to do is think about, what's the new thing that you're adding? What's the new thing that you're providing, whether it's to the country or to a company, and start there. And that for me is the key to opening a business, finding that new thing, and then using that as a springboard to create real value for people.
So you decided to come and directly start your company, or restart your company, so to say, here in Japan. And when we had a brief phone call a few weeks ago, you told me that one thing that was a bit challenging and unique was you applied for business visa right away.
Yes.
And you also had to bring your family on that visa. Can you tell us a little bit about how the process was for this?
Toby, this is a great question. And I think this is something that as a larger society, both as the foreign community, but also the Japanese organizational level. I think this is a really important conversation that we need to have, because there's some really interesting steps forward, some real interesting innovation happening on an organizational level, whether it's the startup visa. I think I've also just seen recently there was the digital nomad visa.
Correct.
I don't know whether that's it's currently in a form yet or whatever.
I think so, yeah.
But the idea is there that there's a lot happening to bring foreign entrepreneurs to Japan. However, there's a bottleneck. And the bottleneck isn't culture. The bottleneck isn't language. The bottleneck, unfortunately, is the process of immigration. Not immigration in terms of, coming to Japan or not, as in the actual office is completely understaffed. And they, and I've heard, people do get very frustrated, but we do have to understand that they're doing the best that they can with what they have, right? So that means we need to give them more. We need to rethink how that they work so that they can really help foreigners come to Japan. So if you want to come to Japan, the easiest way for you is to get a job with a Japanese company.
Yes.
And then they can usually sponsor you a work visa. However, when you have your own company, who's going to sponsor your visa, right? And so what I ended up doing was founding a godo gaisha in Japan first. So the first thing I had to do was register the company. Now, this is interesting. I didn't, and neither do you, no one has to, be a citizen or even a legal resident of Japan in order to open a business.
So you can come to Japan on a tourist visa and register your company?
Yes, or you can be sitting in your house in Berlin and be a registered. Yeah, you can register a company in Japan.
Wow.
What you can't do is work in it and then open a bank account, all these other things. But we can get to that in 1 second. But you can officially register a company in Japan as a foreigner, even with no visa title. So what I first did was register a godo gaisha, because it was really important for me that I was able to bring my family. And something that's a little bit different in my case that I have compared to when I speak to some of my other whether it's colleagues or friends or peers, is that they're often married to a Japanese national. And that is what I recently heard someone call the fast pass. Like in Disneyland, how they have like the fast pass. They said, this is the fast pass. And it's quite true. I have to say, my husband is Mexican. My life in Mexico bureaucratically is much easier. I'm Australian, same thing for him, in Australia. But when you're both foreigners, and our son obviously being Mexican Australian, we all needed visas, right? So really the only option for us was to sponsor our own visas, which is what we did. This is possible. However, it's an incredible, there's a lot to do. So the way that it works, if anyone's interested, what I've kind of heard. Yeah. So what I've heard from what some of my listeners say, and might be interesting for your, Unpacking Japan listeners as well, is that people like to get really deep into a topic. Mm-hmm. I don't know why, but they really like to kind of, what they say, get otaku. So I'll talk to you how it works out. So what you do first is that you as this business sponsor, so for example, the one that's on the business registration, you have a different visa than your family. Your family has a dependent visa. So what you need to do first is you have to apply for a business manager visa. Now, this is one of the most difficult visas to get in Japan, simply because of the requirements. Everything from, you need an office space, so not a co-working space, you need a specific office, and the office cannot be a shared office, nor can it be, within an office. Like, for example, I wouldn't be able to come here and rent a room from, you at Zen Group. I would have to, it would have to be somewhere else. You need a landline, and you need 2 desks and a chair. Now, the reason why I think this, the funny thing about this is people think, yeah, but how would they know? The bank, when you open a corporate bank account, come to your office and they check that you have 2 desks and a chair.
No, it's only 1 desk. You can't.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's only one, and you've kind of tricked them with like taking the photo twice. So they come and check. So you apply, and then obviously you have to put in your business plan. You have to show your numbers that you forecast. I obviously was able to support my application with the fact that, we've been in business for quite some years now, and we've had, we had quite a successful run during the pandemic. And so we were able to prove that, we're a profitable, proven business model. Because, when you tell, and this was also a new thing, when I was, trying to get a corporate bank account, and I was telling banks that we do, innovation programs, customized innovation programs, it was like, what's that? What's that? I can't touch it. And it can be remote or in person. So you're telling me you're doing this customized innovation program thing and it can be online. So it's kind of imploding in their minds a little bit. Like, what does that even mean?
It didn't connect.
But when I showed them, this is, how we've been operating the last couple of years, and like, okay, so, what? So it was, it really did take quite a bit of convincing. And the thing that actually moved the needle in order for us to open a bank account is that it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a deliverable. You don't have to have done the work, but to have at least a statement of intention with a Japanese company that, yes, we would like to work with this person.
No.
Even though, I had clear...
Like first client.
Yes, but this person has to say, yes, we're interested. And that for that company to be a Japanese company is a plus. Now, none of this is a requirement, on the website, right? When you're going and you're checking what are the requirements. Now, this is not on the website. I'm simply sharing what's been my personal experience in helping the person in front of me get to a yes, right? Because they're not telling me no. Their manager is telling them no, or their system is telling them no. So what I have to do is help them do their job, which is to help me, right? And so the more that I can help them, because, I often hear, quite a few people say, well, that's not my job. And I think the number one job that I need right now is to get a corporate bank account open. So whatever you need from me,
I'll give it to you.
To open a corporate bank account, I will give it to you. Even though, when I was in Germany, because I, I ran a business both in Germany as well as in Australia. I mean, Australia, I don't like to speak about my business in Australia because it's easy. I'm an Australian citizen, right? But for example, my bank account in Germany, super easy compared to, for example, here. So there's that. So, when you will have your visa as a business manager. So once that's approved, you will get your certificate of eligibility, and then you can come to Japan and then you'll get your visa. Now you get your initial visas for 1 year. You have to, in that year, prove a certain amount of profitability, and that you've, for example, hired Japanese staff and all those kind of things. That's one. Then parallel to you applying for your business manager visa, you need to apply for your family visa. Now, the thing with a family visa that I want people to keep in mind is that can take a little longer, the family visa. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to come together with your family, you might be looking kind of at a gap of, could even be 1 to 2 months. Now, this unfortunately really does stem down to immigration just not really having enough resources in order to process the kinds of applications that are coming in, the volume. Now, this is a wonderful thing for Japan because it means that lots of people are coming to Japan. They're interested in running a business in Japan. They want to live here. They want to bring their families here. Wonderful things. But when it comes to the actual transition of, or that translation of the idea, the dream that we have as a family to come to Japan, and then, there's these unfortunate bottlenecks that I'm sure with enough funding, and I would say enough intention, and also enough maybe rethinking how the process should be, putting the user at the center, as we say in human-centered design, I'm sure that these are solvable problems. I'm convinced they're solvable problems.
So now it's 2022, 2023. Mm-hmm. You have an office with 2 desks and a chair. Mm-hmm. You have a bank account. Yes. You got your visa. Yes. Your family visa is being processed or obtained. Mm-hmm. You come to Japan and you can finally run your business. Yes. Right? Design thinking Japan. And you've mentioned already a few times so far human-centric design. Mm. Can you maybe explain a little bit this concept that is at the core of your business and then expand on what is it that you do in terms of your workshops and how do you work with Japanese companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do at the core of everything is that we help a company identify the problem to solve. I mean, I think, if you even reflect in a moment, have you ever been in a project where what you thought the problem was versus what the problem actually was?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it was a bit different. So what we do is that we say, rather than jumping to solutions, let's take a moment and identify what's the problem we want to solve. Because if we jump to solutions, no matter how innovative or how AI fancy, savvy, or whatever the solution is, if it's not really solving a problem, then what's it all for, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we help companies do is that we teach them this process of how to identify the problem that you want to solve, and then and then some tools to solve it. So that's essentially what the process looks like. Simply 2 steps: identify the problem and then solve it. Find the right it, solve it right. That's it. And in terms of what that looks like, it really depends on company to company. But if we're looking at, for example, larger industries, right? So whether you're an automotive company in Japan or whether you're what they call meikasan, right? So the like large industrial productions. You might, for example, have a look at your portfolio of assets, and maybe something that was really profitable, let's say whether it's in the 90s or the early 2000s, maybe that's not profitable anymore. But you still have these assets, whether they might be warehouses, they might be trucks, they might be actual machines, could be anything. Mm-hmm. What we help companies do is solve for that and say, okay, well, how can we repurpose these assets? Or maybe you've got a process, and this is particularly where I think we do most of our work in Japan, is that we look at the process and we try to put the person in the process. So what happens is if we say, let's say that every month, for whatever reason, accounting is late. For whatever reason, it's late. And every month, without fail, let's say the employees are a day or so behind on their salaries. This can be absolutely a nightmare for people, because maybe there's, certain auto payments set up for their rent or for their mortgages or whatever. This can absolutely wreak havoc on someone's life. So what we would usually do is we look at the process and say, okay, well, accounting is late every month. Well, they're late, so let's put a reminder system in, right? We put a reminder system in, but still accounting is somehow still late. So what we ended up doing, this is no longer hypothetical. I began explaining this as a hypothetical, but it's actually a story. So what happens is that when we recognize that, this isn't happening, or, the accounting department is still really struggling to kind of keep up, we went in and we said, hey, what's going on? When we started speaking to people. This is before solving the problem, we want to understand what the problem is. I said, what's going on? And they said, well, we don't get the data that we need from other departments until, let's say, the 22nd. And we have to process everything by the 25th. If we had this data, say on the 18th or even on the 17th, we would be able to do what we needed to do. Now, nobody knew this in the company. So what we did is we ran a multi-department workshop, and we had sales, we had HR, we had accounting, all in the same room. And then they were able to see, okay, now we understand what's important to you. Now, sales, we're not giving them the data because they're malice people and they didn't want, accounting to know. They just didn't know it was important. Right? And how often does that happen in a company, that the alignment or the misalignment is there, not because someone has bad intentions, but because no one knew, right? And so this is what we try to do, is we try to open up the communication channels between the departments and say, what's going on and how can we solve it together? And so, with that, and that was simply just, a 1-day workshop, we were able to align what did accounting need, what did sales need, what did HR need? And then with that very simple 1-day workshop, we were able to make sure that people were getting their salaries on time. And the other thing that I found most interesting, and perhaps what's closer to my heart, is that the accounting department's sick days went down because they weren't as stressed. Because imagine trying to do all of your work in 3 days. If you have a month to do your work, you're probably, busy enough. Imagine having to do it in 3 days. And then after that kind of, at the end of each month, the accounting team would have to take days off because they were physically ill, Toby. Now, maybe this is my years in Germany. I was 8 years in Germany, but you should not be ill because of your job. You should not be physically ill.
No, probably not.
Because of your job. And so the fact that we were able to not only solve a problem, or like a hard, real, tangible problem, but we were able to see some really great soft benefits around that, i.e. employee engagement going up, sick days going down. These are just wonderful things. And so what we do is we just take those aspirations that Japanese companies have, and we translate them into action in a really short time. So if we think about innovation programs, you might think that they might be years long. And while sometimes they are, particularly when it comes to prototyping, if you're prototyping an MRI machine or if you're prototyping a car, that process can be years. But what we try to do is that we're kind of really at the beginning of the innovation process, and we can map out really quickly, even if it's just using paper or cardboard or whatever it is, really simple, low fidelity prototypes, what that map might look like. One of the, I guess, like a a visual way to explain it is, you know that a movie, can be 2 hours, but often you watch a trailer for 90 seconds to say, is this a movie I want to watch, right? That's what we do with our workshops. We have a 90-second trailer of, do I want to invest my time in this movie, right? And so companies, rather than, having to invest a year or 2 years, they can get essentially a view really quickly, in just 3 to 5 days and say, yes, this is definitely the movie that we want to see. And this is something definitely that we want to invest our time in.
I'm quite curious because the way you've explained how kind of breaking down communications to finding where the core of the issue is seems like a completely logical problem-solving approach. Now, in Japanese companies, especially traditional companies, there are a lot of processes in place, specific communication channels. Person A will send this document to person B, will send this document to person C, and at the end, the salaries will get the salaries. How do you kind of approach a company and tell them, I'm going to shuffle everything and we're going to rearrange the way your communication channels work to a new way?
That's a great point. What I've found working with my Japanese customers or my Japanese clients is that you don't begin with what's going to happen. You begin with
the result.
Or the result, because it's too scary. Like the result, the process. So what we do is that rather than looking, for example, at that process, there's always someone behind the process. No matter how technical something might seem, there is someone behind that SAP screen. There is someone behind that slide deck who either made it or who is watching it or trying to understand it. So what we do is we try to highlight that we're looking to operate more efficiently and to operate more user centric. Now, this is very similar to a Japanese concept called omotenashi. Omotenashi is the anticipation of somebody's needs. But the anticipation of somebody's needs is very different, for example, to what we often see in Japanese companies, which is much more skewed towards politeness or respect for rules. So, you might have an example that you want to go to a bank and you might want to make an international transfer, or you might want to do any kind of which for some reason is very muzakashi and you can't do it. So you will, speak to someone, you'll speak to the person and you'll say, I'd like to do this thing. And they say, no, for these reasons, we can't do it. And then you say, okay, is there someone else I can speak to? And, they go and get their manager. And one of the first things the manager often refers to is, I'm sorry, was my employee not polite? And you think, no, she was perfectly, or he or they were perfectly polite, but they haven't solved my problem. And I'd like you to solve my problem. So what we're looking at is a shift from a blind fellowship or following of processes that are really, questionable and not necessarily proven to be efficient processes anyway, to a shift to, let's make this more human-centric, more customer-centric. The customer has never been more powerful than they are at the moment. They can so quickly share to their followers or to their friends, or they vote with their money and they say, I'm not going back to that bank, because guess what? We have options now. I don't have to go to the large banks if they're not going to give me money. I can go to, online banks, or I can go to those whether it's smaller banks, you can. And so it's about how to make your company stay relevant. And the way that you can stay relevant is that you stay closely connected to your user. And another thing I guess that I often see, while this might be true to Japan, it's also very much something that we see abroad, is that, you ask yourself, are you working for your customer or your boss? If you've got a problem and there's a real situation and you have to make somebody happy, and only one person can be happy, you either serve your customer, you solve the customer's problem, or you can solve your boss's problem. What's it going to be? Often, people will skew to their boss. But really, what we need to do is we need to shift to the customer. We need to listen to the customer, like the Japanese have for many hundreds of years. But I would say the last kind of 50 years, we've seen a bit of a shift away from that traditional model of Japanese leadership principles that I think are more relevant and more effective today than ever. So if we think about those ones from, that like honestly, the 1800s, I mean, obviously, yes, there was other issues, so at that time as well, that's the irony is not lost on me there. But in terms of that absolute commitment to making the best experience for someone. We've seen Japanese companies many times transition from whether you're a pencil company, you can become a car company, whether you started selling bicycles and you ended up, now selling MRI machines. We've seen these incredible transitions multiple times.
I mean, Toyota started as a weaver, right?
So yes, exactly. So we see that this is because Toyota moved from being obsessed with their machinery or their product to being obsessed with their customers. What did their customer want? And then we see those same companies becoming too product-centric and forgetting the reason why they were so successful in the first place was listening to their customers.
I'm quite curious about, so you've worked with a lot of Japanese companies and you just said that you go into the core of the problem. And oftentimes you find and you kind of uncover obsolete processes that are preventing this customer-focused approach. When you go and dig and find the root of all those problems, do you find a common thread as to why those companies have those processes that are preventing innovation, preventing customer satisfaction and such?
Yes, absolutely. The common thread is that no one asked why early enough in the process. It's just been if we've been just keep doing this, and then now we've been doing this for 5 years, but no one really knows why. So the common thread is not asking why this is important early enough. I was recently listening to the Elon Musk biography, and one of the things that he implemented in his management system was that you can't put a department's name on a requirement. You have to put a person's name. Toby said this has to be in the car. So for whatever reason, I have a question, I can call you and say, Toby, does this have to be in the car? And you will say yes or no, rather than say, speak to production or something,
Accountability.
Exactly. And so when it comes to going into a company, and I have to also kind of highlight that when we're going in and we're doing these kind of problem finding workshops, it's very important to hold space with respect and dignity for people. Because people are not operating in this kind of quote unquote, what I often hear, foreigners say stupid or waste of time or muda na shigoto, because they're, uneducated people or they don't have anything better to do. It's sometimes just hasn't been designed at all. So often the reason why something is not well designed is because it hasn't been designed well at all. So when we go in, we hold space and we say, let's have everyone have a voice. Why is it like this in the first place? That's why it's really important, rather than going in and saying, forget all of your processes, here's the new processes. We have to first ask, why was this important in the first place? Because maybe there's still something there. Oh, the reason we needed this particular step, step A, was because this other thing happened. Oh, okay, that makes sense. But maybe step A we don't need anymore because we needed that when we still were using dial-up internet and we are now using Wi-Fi, so actually it's not important anymore. Okay, but because nobody re-looked at step A, we were still just, moving on forward without asking any questions. And so when we hold these problem space workshops, what we call the problem space, asking, finding the problem, you have to do it in a curious way. You can't do it in like a finger pointing way. And it's also really important the way in which you do it. It can't be kind of like this back and forth one-on-one. It's much more collaborative. We sit in teams, we sit in circles, we look at, we often use walls. And the reason why we use walls is because we have the work up on the wall. Now, why is that important in Japan? It's because we're standing next to each other, looking at the wall, because the problem isn't between us, it's at the wall. So we're standing as a team, united, looking at this problem. So there's a lot of things that we like to do to move the team away from being the problem. So the team itself is probably not the problem, honestly. Probably what's the problem is that either the team hasn't looked at the certain way that things have been running for a while, or someone is asking that, something of the team that hasn't been questioned either. So we try to separate the people and the problem as well. And it's very important, particularly in Japan, to do that in a really respectful way, particularly because people are so passionate about their jobs.
So when you run those workshops and you kind of introduce these, I don't know what adjective to choose here, but modern or perhaps Western approaches to, like bonding the team facing the wall and visualizing the problems and discussing together to find solutions which they may never have done before. what are the reactions? Do the employees engage, or are they shy? Are they kind of confused about what's going on and why this workshop is happening? Because I'm assuming you will initially probably talk about this with their superiors that will approve the workshop, and then you come in and work with them to kind of figure things out.
Yeah. What's really important, and I think you've touched on some really key points, is that when we introduce the concept of human-centered design, I like to use traditional management principles as the gateway. So to not say, hey, there's this new thing and it's this Western ideology. If anything, it's not. If anything, there's a lot that we can take from traditional management principles here in Japan, whether it's omotenashi, whether it's kanban, whether it's kaizen, whether it's gemba, all these really important traditional Japanese principles. But what these principles don't have is a cohesive process. So what I try to do is layer traditional Japanese traditional Japanese principles with a global best practice process. And that's what I try to find, that crossover, so that nobody feels kind of super out of place. Another thing that we like to do is all of these workshops are run in the Japanese language. You know, our team runs all of our workshops either bilingually or at least in Japanese. And it's really important because when you're dealing with particular challenges, often people, you know, and you want to build psychological safety, people feel comfortable doing that in their native language. Another way that we help support people or to engage openly, and this is a very simple, I don't want to call it like a tip, but if anyone, and this is not even if you're just running a workshop, but if you are wanting to, and if you're sitting with your Japanese team for whatever reason and you'd like everyone to have an opinion and you have 30 minutes, this is what I want you to do. Instead of saying, okay, everyone, okay, Tobias, you tell me your opinion and then you tell me your opinion. What I want you to do is walk into the room. Ideally, you know, if you have some post-its, great. If not, you know, if people are on the computers, and say, okay, everyone, in our current team chat or in this meeting chat, if you're a Teams organization or whatever, I want you to write down something that if you got a question, write down your thoughts on this particular question. Take 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning of the meeting. And then what you'll have is a log of everybody's thoughts, and then share. So one of the key ways that we operate is that we begin first with individual kind of download time. Now, I often use this in Japan because of the skewing towards being a little bit more introverted, not kind of speaking up too much. But honestly, this is best practice, particularly if you work with like an IT team as well. Like if you're working with a bunch of people that don't love, you know, and kind of don't really speak up, splitting your conversation into 2 parts, individual working time and group discussion time, is going to transform how people have conversations. So the way that when I run workshops, and I've had actually some either foreign facilitators or I've had some foreign management observe the workshops, and they've said, I've never seen this team so engaged, or I've never seen this team so loud. And that's because what we like to do is we like to set people up for success. When you attend with one of our workshops, or just in general, one thing that I want people to feel is that I want them to feel like they're going to win, whatever that is, whatever that means for them. I want them to feel that they're in a safe space, that I'm there for them, no matter what. This won't go wrong because I'm here, so you can trust me with that. And another thing that's kind of interesting, and this is maybe something for those bilingual listeners, whether you're a native Japanese speaker and you speak English at work, or whether you're a native English speaker and you speak Japanese at work, the simple fact when you switch to another language, people hear your accent. There's something about that when my Japanese participants hear that everything that this innovation process that I'm walking them through in Japanese, they hear a subtleness of, this doesn't have to be perfect. Because, I mean, I'm speaking Japanese, and I mean, of course, my Japanese is good enough that I can run a company here in Japan. But it doesn't have to be perfect. And there's this element that I am very intentional that they receive that message. This is not about being perfect.
That's interesting. This kind of just the fact that you present this in Japanese with a not perfect Japanese, breaking this barrier a little bit already. But what's more is, it seems that no matter the culture, in the end, if the setting is right and the people feel comfortable, you can get them to talk, you can get them to exchange and kind of break down a problem, work together on something.
That's it.
And the way you also kind of share this is not only in your workshops, but you also try to kind of promote a little bit this human-centric design through keynotes as well.
That's right.
So you do speak to larger audiences. Can you share your experiences doing this in Japan?
Of course. So when it comes to change in Japan, nothing is more important than the community that you create that goes along with it. And so it's even something that you're doing with this podcast here at Zen Group. Creating the community around the change is really the legacy. And, people say, in Japan, relationships are everything. And yes, I mean, you can read that and you can see it on LinkedIn, you can like it and whatever. But when you really embody what that means, is that when you create a community of people, when you create meaningful relationships amongst people that are united behind a common idea, there is something that is so powerful, and that particularly here in Japan, and I found that particularly here in Japan, how deeply people can be committed to a cause, and how deeply someone can, really try, really try hard at something that I haven't really seen other places. Maybe, I could travel more perhaps, but really I've seen a ganbaru spirit here that is just undeniably Japanese. And so when you create a community amongst people with that ganbaru spirit, you can really shift a cultural needle. And so one of the reasons that I advocate for new ways of working, human-centered design, is that there's a couple of reasons. One is the amount of hours that you spend working is an incredible amount of hours in your day, in your life. And if you don't feel confident, or if you don't feel like that you have the tools to do your job well, that's a lot of time that you're probably feeling stressed. The way that I like to kind of talk about it is that, have you ever been in a new city, Toby, where you don't speak the language? I know you speak plenty of languages, but imagine you're somewhere where you don't speak the language and your phone dies and you know that you need to get back to your hotel, but you're just not quite sure yet how you're going to get back there, and your phone dies. Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, it happened quite a few times.
How did you feel?
I don't know, you just go talk to the next person you see and ask, I'm going this hotel.
Yeah, help me. But you feel scared, right? You're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? And so the way that I like to think about innovation is a little bit like that innovation is about going somewhere new that I've never been before. And if I don't have a map, I'm going to be scared, right? I'm going to be scared. And so what I try to be for my customers is that map. And in Japan, it's very important for you to help build success stories in order for people to then trust you, or in order for people to feel connected to your idea. And so what I do is I share these success stories so that people are interested in learning more. And, once you kind of, I use human-centered design as a tangible, theme for people that, we talk about design thinking and putting the user at the center. But really, if you peel all that away, what I'm really, really passionate about is that people can show up for their work, for their lives with confidence and with the tools that they need to be their best. That's for me everything. And so, I have been very lucky to speak at very large scale audiences, whether I was interviewing Bill Gates on a panel. I've spoken at an arena in Toronto in front of like 25,000 people. I've spoken in Atlanta like 18,000 people, and these are really interesting in terms of like the numbers. But it's really made me realize that nothing is more important than this one-on-one connections that you make, whether it's, for example, on your podcast, or whether you start a meetup, or whether it's at your work, whatever it is. So yes, keynotes are really cool. I really enjoy it. There are some people that it's literally their worst nightmare. I think there's like some kind of statistic that like people would like prefer to like
public speaking is not really but I'm quite curious about doing this in Japanese context, right? Because keynotes and big presentations, you mentioned the big arenas in Toronto,
like in the Western context. Yes. So it's like, what's it like here?
It's very normal, especially I would say in North America, to have those. And you see audiences sometimes very engaged, and especially if the speaker is, I'm thinking Gary Vaynerchuk or speakers like this that really kind of get their crowd. in Japan, the crowd is usually known to be more quiet and just absorbing what's being said without showing too much reaction. How do you structure it?
Yeah,
how do you engage?
This is really important when it comes to like we were always talking about the user, you know, in human-centered design is like, and obviously as you mentioned, your North American, you know, person in the audience is different to your Japanese person in the audience. And so what we can do as those being on stage who have a message is that you can really think about, how can I create a connection with this person? Again, remember we came back to that idea about being in Japan, relationships are really important, that connection with people is really important. I did essentially a study, over 2,000 employees here in Japan. And the question was, what makes an engaging work environment, right? And without a doubt, the number one feedback that came from Japan was when they said, the thing that would essentially make me quit a company that was the worst time of my life, that I would rather go and do something else, is not when the things got hard, but when they were alone. And for me, that was a real insight, because when you understand that the worst possible thing for one of your Japanese team members or one of your Japanese colleagues is to be alone, even though they may be not talking, whatever it is, they don't like being alone. They don't mind things when it's hard. This is what I found so interesting, is that it wasn't how difficult the project was. There were some absolute nightmare projects that these employees were on, but that wasn't the complaint. The complaint was either I was alone or no one helped me. And so when you learn that, you understand so much about Japanese culture. And so one of the things that you can do is you can leverage technology. So there's an app, I mean, this is 2024. I'm going to say Slido. If you're listening to this probably 6 months from now, there's probably something else. If you're listening to this in 2027, there's probably something else. But this is where you can really leverage technology. And that when you're a speaker, you can understand that you also have these tools available to you. And there's an app called Slido, what you can do, and that people can ask you anonymous questions. And so this is something that I actually started doing also with the podcast, is that I saw like all these listeners. I was like, there's all these listeners, but I mean, I'd love to get feedback from them, but I don't know kind of like how. So what I started doing with even the podcast and also with keynotes is that I would post, this is the link. If you have a question that you want to ask this person that I'm going to interview, you can type it here. And then, for example, when you're giving your keynote, you can be giving your keynote and then say, okay, this is this question, or take this QR code. You can have it on the first slide of your presentation. Everyone, I want you to take a photo of this. Everyone's got their smartphones obviously with them. They'll take a photo. And then during my presentation, anything that comes to your mind or any questions that you might have, I want you to send in anonymously to this. And then when I'm done, I'm going to open up my phone. I'm going to go through your questions. And so one thing that I've also found to be really important is the difference between what an engaging what engagement looks like. In the West, it's, hundreds of people lining up to ask a question, or no. Or I remember being in my German university, people actually fighting with the professor, which for me was, whoa. I'd literally just come from a Japanese university, went to my German university, and I was like, oh my gosh. Considering when I went to high school in Japan, I remember putting up my hand to ask a question, and the teacher said to me, "Doshita no?" Which means, what's wrong? Not, what's your question? He said, what's wrong? And I said, well, nothing's wrong. I just had a question. He said, well, if nothing's wrong, put your hand down. So
that's quite a difference.
Yeah, it's quite a difference. And so when you acknowledge that engagement doesn't have to look like engagement, what you see in the West, when you understand that you can engage deeply with your Japanese community, like you mentioned on Twitter, I think you have a really strong community on Twitter. You know, you might think, who are these people? But I mean, there is a community there. If you create ways or windows or opportunities for them to connect with you, you're going to have a really engaging talk, and people are really going to, feel connected to your message. So remember, the worst possible thing for a Japanese employee is to feel alone. So in your talk, help them feel less alone, right? And how you can do that? Use technology, ask questions, have, Q&As after, whatever that might look like. So just remember that when you understand that Japanese people are looking for community, that they exist in community, when you understand that, you can make better decisions for your business, and you can make better decisions also for your relationships.
You brought up the topic of like connections, right? Mm-hmm. Human relationships being important, also building relationships for keynotes, for workshops, but also to build your company and your career. And some people put a lot of emphasis. I mean, some of our former guests have noted quite a few times that having connections, building a network was very important for them to be successful in Japan with their business.
Yep.
Did you find a similar experience, or did you see it a little differently?
Yes, absolutely. However, it doesn't have to be the traditional way that you kind of look at it. For example, I don't go to nomikai. I have an 18-month-old son. I'm not going drinking. And so people think, oh, if you don't go drinking, what's your client's going to say? I tell my clients, I'm not going drinking. I'm going home to my son. And you know what they say? Go home safely. There's not this kind of like 1980s bubble push anymore. So the way that I would really encourage people to build a network if they don't have one is to firstly begin online. If you're not someone that's comfortable being, having an online presence, whether it's, you don't want to be on camera or maybe you don't want to use audio, you can always write, and so you can find ways that people can find you and your particular niche topic. It's really important to have your niche topic. Write articles on it or write for somebody else or something. So absolutely the key to, I guess almost in a way, maybe interesting opportunities or maybe non-linear opportunities in Japan, certainly is to have a network. But I mean, every foreigner turned up in Japan with no network at one point, right? So start building your network in a way that works for you. I'm not saying that you have to do it how I did it. I did it because I love speaking to people. I love that. I love interviewing people. I love workshops. I don't get nervous speaking in front of people, but maybe you do. And that's totally fine. Find a way that works for you to build your network. But I guess a non-negotiable for me would be if you need one or not. You can build really interesting, really unique businesses here in Japan, but you can't do it alone. You need, whether it's your Japanese customers or partners or suppliers, and in order to do that, you need some kind of proof that people should trust you. Why should they trust you, right? And if you think about just simply from a scaling perspective, is if every single time that you needed to build trust with someone, you had to have a 1-hour meeting with them, I mean, that limits to your meetings. Like let's say there's 40 hours in a week. That means if you don't go to the bathroom and you don't eat lunch, you can have maybe 40 hours of meetings
with 40 between any meeting.
Yeah, between any meetings, exactly. You can meet with 40 people, right? But then if, for example, maybe you publish an article, maybe that article gets 100 views, And again, something that's really important is that people can find, in their own time as well. So I would say a network is really important, not only for becoming well known, but also for you to have a really strong connection to your users in Japan. What are they saying? What do they need from you? Because if you live in this kind of like foreign bubble, you're going to have that disconnect between you and your local community or you and your customer. And that's going to be really important in terms of growing your business or bringing something about value to the market. So the closer you are to the end user, or whether that's your customer, partner, supplier, whatever, I mean, in my opinion, the better. Or for me, that's how it's been at least.
So building a community, yes, online is possible. It doesn't have to be the traditional way. And you said that you actually don't do the traditional way so much because you have an 18 months old son.
Yes.
So that means you built your business at the same time as being pregnant, having a child, and moving to Japan. I don't know where to start my question here, but like, how do you do it? So
first thing is that you need to have a supportive partner. That's the first thing. I have been reflecting, I guess, in a way, about running your own business versus having a job as a mom. And for me, having my own business as a mom was definitely the right choice. I know for other women it's different, but for me, that was definitely the right choice. I'm able to set my hours. I prioritize spending time with my son in the mornings, and then, I work on my business in the afternoons. And when I'm with my son, I'm not checking my emails, but also when I'm working on my business, I'm not checking in, with my mom is currently actually here helping us. And this is maybe also just a parenthesis, how to manage building a business and having a baby. I don't like the idea that people say you can't have it all. I think you can have it all, but you need help. And what help looks like is different for people. I either say you have to pay for it, live near it, or fly it in, right? So you either live near your in-laws, you have to, send either have a nanny or send your kid to daycare or fly it in. I had to fly my mom in. Luckily, she's in a position in her life as well that she wanted to do that, right? Because that's also the other thing. I know that there are many grandparents like, finally, I got my life back.
Free from the kids.
Like, see you later. So, I mean, it takes a lot of even what we do in our workshops, right? We're coming back down to what is it that you want? What's the problem that we need to solve, right? And so I guess there's a few things surrounding having a baby in a business. First thing is you need help. You absolutely need to have your partner, so the child's other parent is absolutely the most important stakeholder in your business. I often see women that are wanting to either start a business or run their business, but they haven't actively or clearly communicated that to their partner. And then they're kind of like, oh, he's not helping me. And I think, but have you told him that you need 2-3 hours a day to work on this new website or something? No. Why don't you start there? Really make sure that you include your partner in the discussion. I'm lucky in the sense that my partner, my husband, is very supportive of my business and my career. He always has been. One of the reasons I married him, especially for women, if you marry someone who's in line with supporting you. So I think in terms of when it comes to having a business and a baby, one of the best things I did to either have a business or have a baby, I'm not sure which one first, was to have my own business. I think it would be much more difficult having a kind of a 9-to-5 because you spend so much time away from your son. That was a real shock for me. Someone is, like me, I love my business. I love working. I love seeing the impact that we can have in companies. And I thought, honestly, Toby, I would have kind of a couple of weeks kind of maternity leave and I would be straight back in. I didn't want to come back.
You want to keep playing with your son.
I loved spending time with my son. One thing that really shocked me as being a mom and having my son was I was so surprised how much I just adored spending time with him and that my business just kind of melted away. Then I kind of I guess it was the hormones and everything else kind of leveled out a little bit. And I recognized that I loved both of them still. So I thought, okay, now's a good time for me to now look at how I can build my business back. And I had a conversation and I said to my husband, I want to go back to Japan. I really want to make this happen. And he said, okay, well, let's plan for this. Because at that point, as we kind of spoke about earlier, we were still in Mexico at that point. So almost a year ago, March 23rd, I think was.
Yeah, that's that's now, right? We're in the middle. Yeah. We're reaching the end of March right now.
Yeah, so almost a year ago, we were still living in Mexico, no visas, no established business in Japan. And in a year, we were able to turn that all around through, obviously hard work, but also very clearly communicating with your partner what you have in mind and then working on that together. But I'm still new in this kind of thinking, but I think if you're a woman and you have it either in your heart to have a business and to have a baby, do it. I hear too many, and this is particularly for my German friends, that they put off having children because they don't want it to affect their business. Now, I don't think you should ever as a woman have to choose between having a business and a baby. If anything, our business is stronger since I had my son.
The new CEO.
Yes, since I had my son. And I think it's because I only have a certain amount of hours in the day and I use them really effectively. I'm like, you're a yes, you're a no. You're a yes, you're a no.
You said in a recent podcast episode that you kind of work in blocks.
Absolutely.
Can you explain about how you set this up?
So what that means is when I'm kind of with my son, I'm not checking emails. It could be I could be getting ding, ding, ding. I'm not checking emails. So when I'm with my son, I'm completely in mom mode. I'm not at the park kind of also, writing emails. No.
Holding his son in one hand and answering email.
No. So I'm complete with my son. But, and this is something that I have seen, particularly mothers, we tend to not be so good at, is that when I'm with my business though, I am not calling my husband. I'm not calling my son to check in. How are you doing? Did Charles eat his lunch? Did he sleep well? I'm not going to know any of that information until I check out tonight, which is either 5:30 or 6 o'clock. So then I'm home to cook for him and to bath him. So When I'm mom, but when I'm business, I'm not checking in with my son. And whoever he's with at that time, I trust enough that whatever issue would come up, they'll be able to solve it. My son is never with someone that I would not trust their judgment, right? So working in blocks has been absolutely essential for me. When I'm a mom, when I'm working, that's the only thing that matters.
You also said that you use the 1% rule. And you explained that there are different 1% rules if you look into books here and there, but you kind of made your own version of it.
Yeah.
And that is that every day you should work 1% of your dream or towards your dream. Mm-hmm. Is my understanding correct?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Toby. So I've spent half my life in Germany and Japan, right? So very perfectionist cultures, right? It's, it's everything has to be perfect. And I just think so much of your life can be wasted waiting for perfect. So why not try to live just a little bit of your dream in the moment that you can? Now, this became particularly important to me when I became a mom, because I was breastfeeding almost every 90 minutes to 2 hours, but, trying to stay awake from lack of sleep, and in the back of my mind thinking what about my business? Or, mm-hmm. And I couldn't wait, in that moment, it was not realistic for me to then go and run a workshop or anything like that. So what I have said to people, particularly if you're not in Japan, but you're passionate about coming to Japan, or you'd like to have a business or something, the idea of, for example, my journey, found a business, get an office, open a corporate bank account, sponsor your family. There's just so many steps that if you wait until all those steps have been done for you to enjoy or for you to feel connected to your dream, you're just wasting so much of your life, right? So what I really encourage people to do, particularly if you feel really distant from your dream for whatever reason, I encourage you to live just 1% of it in the context that you have available to you today. And so for me, before I was back in Japan, but I knew that I wanted to come back to Japan because I knew this was the time for us. It's a really interesting moment in Japan right now in terms of the business. The appetite for change in Japan, I think, has higher than it's ever been. And I knew that it was the time for us to come back and to launch really strongly again with our kind of new pivot, our new pivot. But if I had to wait for all of that to happen in order for me to feel connected, just too much time would have passed. So what I encourage people to do is maybe just that one particular day, just listen to a podcast that's about Japan. Listen to this podcast. Maybe you want to go and get Japanese food, or maybe you want to speak to a Japanese friend on the phone or something. But I encourage you deeply that these little moments, you're also reminding yourself that this dream is not dead. I remember that, when we left in, at the beginning of 2020, when Corona happened, as we all, thought, it's going to be
over soon.
Yeah, it's going to be over soon. And then it just kept, what people keep saying now, the Corona years or the COVID years, right? And then they just kept rolling on. And I thought, my goodness, am I ever going to get back to Japan? And you have to keep your dream alive for yourself, because no one else is going to keep your dream alive for you. Not your husband, not your wife, not your best friend, not your mom, nobody. So if you lose hope for your dream, no one else is going to support it. So you've got to keep your dream alive. Listen to a Japanese podcast, go eat some sushi, whatever, even if it's bad, right? The idea is you're telling not only the universe, but you're telling yourself, this is a part of my life. And today, this is the context. But wait a year and maybe you might have founded a business in Japan.
So you've been here a year after having found your business, and where before you left came again. Looking back, and if anyone's listening to this and is also thinking, I want to start my business, I don't know where to start, I don't know how to start, or I'm scared because of all the hurdles for the visa or for getting clients. Is there any kind of advice you'd like to share with them?
Yes, absolutely. The advice for if you are outside of Japan, you're wanting to come to Japan and start, let's say, a niche business or a unique business, is that you need to be the driver of all of the conversations. So the reason this is also important is because it's particularly when you have new business models. So for example, whether it's like our one, we provide customized innovation programs. This is a new business model for many, let's say, public Japanese services, for immigration, for everything. They're like, what is this kind of thing? So what I have to do is I have to be very they don't have many success stories, right, about this. They don't know. They haven't done it before. Particularly, also add the fact that I'm a woman and I'm sponsoring my husband and my son. Usually it's the other way around. It's usually the man. And of course, immigration also had questions. What about your husband? And I was like, well, this is so strange. Like, if I was a man, I don't think you would be asking these same questions.
Probably not, right?
But they had all these questions about this and that and what about my husband. So you have to be really active in following your application for a couple of reasons. One, when your story is a little bit the too hard pile. It's a foreigner, she wants to start her own business, and what is this business model? We don't really get it. Your application, for good or for bad, kind of goes a little bit on hold, right? And so no one is pushing it. So you've got to get on the phone and say, is there anything? Can I help you? You've got to provide lots of, really good information for them to help them understand. And I guess, so you've really got to push your application. And so much so that, you've got to be calling immigration. You can't just call them once. You literally have to call them 12 times until they pick up because they're very busy. You can't just say, oh, well, I tried to call immigration and, that's it. You need to 100% be responsible for your application. Even though, in an ideal world, you would submit your application and then a week later, it'd come out, but that's not how it is. So when you are coming to Japan in a non-traditional way, right? Also the advice or what I'm sharing is for non-traditional ways. If you apply for a Japanese company and you're getting a Japanese work visa, you're probably good, right? I'm talking about if you are coming to Japan in a little bit of a non-linear, little bit of a unique circumstance, be in the driver's seat of your application. Don't take no for an answer. Not no for an answer in the sense of like, you've got to be aggressive. In terms of people often don't understand something new, right? It's difficult. So you've got to help them understand what it is that you're doing. You can't say, oh, if they don't get it, too bad for them. No, too bad for you, because you're going to miss out on a life in Japan. So be responsible, be in the driver's seat of this application. And no doesn't necessarily mean no. One of the ways that I like to rephrase no in Japan is no means I don't know enough. So it's not N-O, it's K-N-O-W. When you hear no in Japan, it means there's a lack of knowing of what's going on. So if you get a no, it's because they don't know enough. So give them more information than what they need. Something that they even ask for, or that they really appreciated in my application, which I can't believe, but for some reason they wanted to know, is they wanted to know what would a day look like. They wanted an agenda. They wanted a calendar of what would a CEO of a human-centered design agency do in a day.
Put the chair in front of one of the two desks.
First thing, buy chairs, buy tables. They wanted to know 9 o'clock I would do this, 10 o'clock I would do that. Like they wanted to see an agenda. So over communicate, right? Because the no in Japan isn't no, we're not interested. It's we don't know enough to say yes.
It sounds like the advice of being the driver, being proactive is not only for entrepreneurs in the stage of getting their visa or coming to Japan, but applies generally to if you want your business to take off, you need to be the driver because you need to go get the client, you need to go explain your services, offer the solutions to problems you see, and not just be somewhat trying or half trying, right? You need to really want it and go for it. Absolutely.
So be in the driver's seat of everything that you do. And again, one thing that I've found is that it doesn't have to be in the sense that, we often hear entrepreneurship like this kind of aggressive, it's particularly that doesn't work in Japan, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's more like the being in the driver's seat of not assuming somebody knows more than you do, particularly because if you're coming with a niche business and you've got, let's say, a niche family situation, whether you're sponsoring your partner, whether you're sponsoring your family, whatever that might look like, assume that maybe they haven't seen your situation before. Assume that they haven't seen your situation before. So what do they need from you in order to say yes, right? And then to understand that immigration, unfortunately, is a bottleneck in Japan at the moment. And it's not because they're not interested in having foreigners. It's simply because the process doesn't have the adequate resources in order to process all of the applications. So to really be on top of it and to keep going. So I would say it is possible, but remember, there's no blueprint yet, right? Maybe 20 years from now, 50 years from now, people might look to your story and say, oh, it's because that person came to Japan and did this thing that someone else's path is easier. So now, for example, a foreign woman who's sponsoring her family to come to Japan in a human-centered design, running a human-centered design business, has one less hurdle because now immigration has at least heard of it at least once.
What's next in the coming years now? Do you have plans already for what you want to build now that the company is established, it's running? Any new workshops, any new upcoming projects?
Thank you, Toby. Yes, one thing, and it's so funny that you say now that the company's like up and running, what's next? You have no idea how happy I am that I can finally just get to work and having all of that application, all of the visa stuff, the company setup stuff, all of the hankos, all that kind of stuff. Now that that's all done, I'm just so excited for what we have ahead of us. We've got some really exciting opportunities for not only just innovation programs, but for complete transformation. So when we come in and we help a business not only just add a few new tools to their innovation kind of toolkit, but they can actually completely transform the way that they work. And one of the reasons for me why I particularly chose Japan was because I believe that what we hear in the media being, Japan doesn't want to change, Japan is really slow. I don't believe that to be true. I don't believe that to be true, not for a minute. Because what I hear when I go to the Gemba, like when I go and I speak to Japanese managers, is that they're all saying that they desperately want to change, but they just don't know how. So I'm really looking forward to sharing human-centered design as a methodology for people so that they can be that they can take their own innovation journey. So as I, kind of mentioned with the cell phone, that guide, I like to think of human-centered design, and particularly what we do at Design Thinking Japan, I like to be that guide for them because I want them to go on an innovation journey. I want them to experience it, but I want them to experience it in a way that they feel not necessarily comfortable, but they feel confident. I don't, we know Japan is a very risk-averse society. I want them to know that you can embark on an innovation journey with confidence. It doesn't always have to be scary, as long as you have your Google Maps, right? You have your guide, and that's what we are for you. So I'm really looking forward to seeing some innovation programs and some projects that not only just add to more innovation in Japan, but change the mindset of people in a way that we don't see kind of, the mindset that we've seen people working for their bosses the last couple of years, that we go back to those original Japanese companies of omotenashi, that desperate, wonderful anticipation of what the customer might need, that we're not simply just, being told the rule books, but we're actually really building services and products and experiences for people that mean something to them and really improve their lives.
So a lot of exciting projects coming.
That's it.
Brittany, we covered a lot of topics today, from visa, coming to Japan, starting a company, human-centric design, teaching workshops, speaking at keynotes. Do you feel like there's anything that you'd like to share that we haven't really gotten into that was maybe important to talk about?
Yes. I'm going to speak specifically on maybe the sexism issue, because people are always interested. True. People are always interested in hearing, but you're a woman in Japan and, what about the decision makers? They're all men and things like that. And I have to say, I have never experienced sexism in Japan. Never. However, what I have experienced is ageism. So people will look at me and say, okay, we'd like to speak to the CEO. I said,
that's me.
Nice to meet you. And they will think, what do you mean? And so for anything, I would say that when you're a woman in Japan, when you're a foreign woman in Japan, I think the Japanese woman in Japan's story is a different story, and I can't speak to that. But when you're a foreign woman in Japan, I've heard actually quite a few foreign women, even from my friends more on the European side, reject opportunities to come to Japan because they've heard that it's bad for women. Now, it is not bad for foreign women at all. I think Japan is a really great place to work when you're a foreign woman. I've never had anyone say anything negative. If anything, I've had nothing really but support. Particularly from clients, suppliers, partners. So I would say the sexism in Japan isn't really as it's kind of sold in the media. I don't experience sexism at all. What you can experience is ageism. And so what you have to do there is when they're asking, isn't there someone older to speak to? What you just need to do more than anything is just give them a reason to say yes. Remember, the no isn't N-O, it's K-N-O-W. It's, I don't know enough to trust you as a CEO yet. So what you try to do is you explain to them, we've done this in other markets, here's me, blah, blah, blah. And another thing that's kind of quite funny is because I'm quite tall, Japanese people just have never really been able to know how old I am. I remember like when I was living here when I was 18 years old and I was coming home from school, I remember someone asked me like if I was looking for a mortgage and I said, no. Yeah. So when you're a foreign woman, they actually have no idea kind of like how old you are. They just kind of like, oh.
The reverse is true as well, right?
So yes, exactly. The reverse is true. So I would say the Japanese landscape is really quite positive for foreign women to work. And you can say no to nomikais. You can set your own rules. And if anything, I think it's really helpful because when they see, for example, that I said no to a nomikai, a younger woman doesn't have to stay either because, there doesn't have to be kind of two sets of rules. So I would say working as a woman in Japan, especially a foreign woman in Japan, has been a really positive experience for me. And the media, I think, likes to sell a certain story because I guess it gets more clicks or likes or whatever. But I've had nothing but really wonderful clients and customers who say nothing but they're wanting to rethink and reshape their organization so that they're more inclusive, not only for one's kind of employee, but they also speak very often and often very directly and vocally about improving the workplace for women as well. So if you as a foreign woman, if you can bring a few of the best global practices to Japan in a way, and if, again, also we have to do it in a Japanese context. You don't have to go to a nomikai, you don't have to work late, things like that. If you can start implementing that little by little in your team, I think not only will other foreign women, but also even Japanese women at the end of the day will also benefit from slowly moving that cultural needle.
Little by little, things change in Japan. Things are being innovated. And who knows if we sit at the same table in 5 years, how things will look like. Hopefully computers will have connectors for webcams and microphones. And the requirements for visas may have changed. I'm glad that you brought this up at the end because I think it was very insightful to add and perhaps conclude our conversation. Brittany, thank you very much for coming all the way from Tokyo, making time for us. It was very insightful for me. I hope that all our listeners enjoyed the show. Thank you everyone for listening and tuning in this week. Thank you for watching on YouTube and we'll be back next week. Bye.
Thanks everyone.